today. One is when blind vision is better than normal vision, and the other, which I'm going to address tonight. Don't worry, I'm not doing two messages this morning. It'll be 1 o'clock or 2 before you got out if I did that. But the other one is called, interestingly enough, the danger of laughter. You have heard that a merry heart does good like a medicine, but laughter can be a double-edged sword, and so we're going to look at that tonight in the 6 o'clock service. But for this morning, let's read our text together. Mark chapter 10. I'm not going to read all those verses at once, but we're going to look at the first 5 verses, verse 35 through 40, as we complete our study together through Mark chapter 10. There have been some significant statements about this passage that I'll mention in a second. But first, verse 35. And James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came unto him, saying, Master, you should do for us whatever we would desire. And he said unto them, What would you that I should do for you? And he said, Grant unto us that we might sit, one on your right hand and the other on your left in your glory. And Jesus said unto them, You don't know what you're asking? Can you drink of the cup that I drink of, and be baptized with the baptism that I'm baptized with? And they said unto him, We can. And Jesus answered and said unto them, You shall indeed drink of the cup that I drink of, and with the baptism that I am baptized, withal shall ye be baptized. But to sit on my right and my left hand is not mine to give, but it shall be given to them for whom it is prepared. Significant statements, paradoxes in Mark chapter 10. 2 shall be one was one of them. Adults must become children is another. The first shall be last. You might say, as far as the rich young ruler was concerned, the rich must be poor. There are several paradoxes, and again, we come into paradoxes as we begin here, and that is that the ruler must be the servant. The ruler has to be a servant. Paradoxes. Now, when I look at this passage, I'm interested in one area, and that is, does it strike you as odd, or unusual at least, that these two disciples are coming up here? I mean, I'm just reading it straightforward. Hey, we'd like you to do whatever we ask. When was the last time anybody ever walked up to you and said that? Now, I'm not trying to judge their motive entirely, because part of what's happening with them is this. Did you notice also that they're saying, when you rule in your kingdom? Well, didn't Jesus just get done telling them, by the way, I'm going to go to Jerusalem, I'm going to get crucified, I'll be buried for 3 days, I'm going to rise again. If that is still in their head, they have incredible faith. I have a feeling it's not really in their head. Maybe they were thinking, sometimes Jesus says something and okay, I didn't understand what you were saying. For instance, here's a good for instance for you. He says, Lazarus is what? Sleeping. Well, okay, well, he's fine, Lord. Let's leave him alone. He needs to rest. No, you guys don't get it. Lazarus is dead, guys. And he does this from time to time to the disciples. So maybe when he's predicting what's going to happen to him, maybe they're just struggling to, okay, I know he said something good. I just don't get it yet. Maybe that's happened to you from time to time with people. They say something and it's like, that's great. If you talk to a doctor and they start spouting out the medicalese, it's like, okay, yeah, sounds great. Let's go for it. You have any idea what I just said to you? It doesn't matter. You're the doctor. I don't know. I do not know. I'm just presenting this as possibilities, because I'm like one of those guys that likes to imagine what's going on in their head and in their heart. And so I put that out there for you to think about, but not to downright come down and say, hey, this is what they've done. Now, one thing about these disciples that you got to think about, though, is everybody else is really irritated with them. Therefore, it seems common sense, can we say, that maybe this was a question that was not quite right yet. All right? Or maybe the other members of the 12 disciples were thinking, man, I wish I'd thought of that. I don't know exactly what's happening with this, but it is interesting to see this. Well, Jesus tells them that their concept of ruling needs to be fixed just a little bit. I believe everybody in this room knows something about how they're looking at ruling. Most rulers, Jesus says, are going to give out dictates and everybody else is going to do what they're saying. But in this case, if you are going to rule, in God's eyes, the best ruler is the person who is busy caring for other people. That's real rulership. That's where we should be in our Christian life, asking, how can I help? Rather than do what I say. All right, there's a world of difference, and the real, except in those positions, I should clarify, there are authority positions. For instance, when the kids were being raised, I was not supposed to be their buddy, I was supposed to be their dad, as Brian said a Sunday night ago, and that's very true. So there are times where you have to say, do what I say. But for all practical purposes, Jesus shows us what a Christian looks like. They wash feet. They find the answer to how can I help. And that should always be a constant in our lives. Now, as we look at the Lord's interpretation then, he says, the 10 heard it. They began to be very displeased with James and John, but Jesus called them to him and said to them, you know that they which are accounted rule over the Gentiles exercise lordship over them. Their great ones exercise authority upon them. It shall not be so among you. Whoever will be great among you shall be your minister. And whoever will be chiefest shall be servant of all. So again, our paradox right here is if you plan to rule, you are a servant. In God's eyes, this is how he sees things. I believe very much the reason that Jesus washed the disciples' feet was to teach them a lesson. I want you to behave like this towards people for the rest of your earthly career while you are representing me on this earth. So then we get to this very interesting thing. For even the Son of Man, his whole purpose, his whole reason for being here, came not to be ministered unto. Park it. Right there. Doesn't God have a right? And one might even say perhaps a natural expectation of people that they ought to minister to him. But that's not his purpose right now, because he has to minister to us, or there will be no eternity in the future for anyone. So he came ultimately to do what no one else could do in this area called redemption. He came to give his life a ransom for many. Well, that takes me down a rabbit trail that is very important, because I just said an important word. Redemption. Everything I'm about to say comes from the Gospel according to Peter. I just wanted to mention that. The first time we see redemption, maybe not entirely the first time we see redemption, but where it is really illustrated well, is in the story of Ruth. And Ruth meets this kinsman redeemer, someone who was related to her, but someone who could also repurchase some land that had been lost and is sitting out there, and unless somebody else purchases that, they have no means to purchase it for themselves. Their land in Israel is lost. Incidentally, unless somebody purchases for you reservations in heaven, your reservations are totally invalid. You will not climb into heaven some other way. We have so many statements about St. Peter's gates that are totally inaccurate. Talk about a boring job. How would you like to have to be the apostle that sat at the gate and asked everybody questions all the time? I don't think that's Peter's function at all. But redemption through Christ and Christ alone is our only hope of heaven and certain realization that we can have. Well, Ruth found herself a husband just like you found yourself to be the bride of Christ. And this girl, Ruth, who was from Moab originally, is literally inserted into the line of Christ. The key word for Boaz is Goel. And Goel has this idea of this person who is related, and he is your kinsman, but he is also paying the ransom for you. our kinsman redeemer. So you find the word goel rather quite a bit. A second term in the Hebrew Old Testament means to deliver or to rescue. If you ever watched Joseph, you might remember a song called Deliver Us. All right? And that's the whole idea. They needed to be delivered from Egypt. Why? Because they were what? Slaves in Egypt. There is a parallel with you and me. We need to be delivered. Why? Because without Christ we are slaves to what? Excuse me? Sin. We are slaves to sin. Do anything you like. Be as nice as you like. Be the Mr. Rogers of your neighborhood. And you will still be a slave to sin without Jesus Christ. He is your only hope for freedom. So Christ has stepped in and has delivered us, as we find in the story of Moses. And I can't help but think of the story of Ruth and the story of deliverance from Egypt, and two guys on the road to Emmaus and the Lord probably referencing these very stories. How can you skip over their heart and core in the area of ransom and redemption? Again, our whole situation is talking about redemption. Being in bondage to sin, imprisoned, someone on the outside is paying your ransom price. And Christ succeeds with that. If you don't know the word telestai, it's one good one to remember. Sometimes I just like to know the word because I like to hear exactly how the Lord said it on the cross. When he said, it is finished, the word was telestai. Now I don't expect you to remember that, but it's just nice to hear his words in his original language from time to time, at least the way it was written down in the Greek. Now, these folks, they're not too happy about what's happened. And we have this redemption situation. Now, there are many more words to redemption because up to this point in time, we were looking at the Old Testament, right? So let's move to the New Testament. These are your New Testament terms for redemption. Agorazo, there's been a price that was paid for us. I don't expect you to say these right. And then we have ex agorazo, which reflects Jesus' substitutionary death on our behalf. He took us out of this curse of the law. You see that every time. The character Ray Comfort. How many of you have heard of Ray Comfort? Raise your hands. Okay. Ray Comfort, when he talks the gospel to someone, the first thing he does is takes them into the law. This could be any old Joe on the street that's feeling pretty good about themselves. And, will you get to heaven? Sure, yeah, why not? And he takes them down the law and he says to them, okay, let's do a test because God is looking at this. He says, have you ever told a lie? Invariably, I've never yet seen a single person that said, no, I've never lied. I really haven't. There might be somebody out there, but most people, if they're honest, say, oh, well, yeah, sure, I've told a lie. Okay, so, what?
5-year-olds, when they come forward to be saved, you ask them, have you ever done anything wrong? No, never.
Yeah. No, it's fun when you watch the little kids when they're first responding, and that opens up another topic because they're always wide-eyed. Have you ever told a lie? No. Well, that it fails. Once you're honest enough to realize you have that problem. What do you call a lie? What do you call someone who lies? You call them a liar. Have you ever taken anything that didn't belong to you? And most people will fess up to taking something somewhere along their life. And he goes down this thing. He says, so by your own admission, you're a lying, thieving adulterer at heart. And if God judges you on that, when you see him face to face, and says, have you never done any of these? And you say that you have, what does the law do to you? It sends you to hell. So if you were to die and face God right now, what would happen to you? And that's his whole approach in talking to people. You would go to hell. But he doesn't leave them there. He points them to Christ and how Christ took everything upon himself to pay our price by himself. So this thing called redemption is a major biblical teaching. But that's not all. Luo, which you find many times, it's like the first verb you run into if you study Greek. Originally means to loosen. So loosen. all right? Being set free. Think of a poor animal that is just too tightly bound to something, and boy, it's just all... Maybe you've been in a situation where you've been near an animal that got tangled into something, and so very carefully you tried, or you've seen videos of animals that were tangled and somebody very carefully tried to loosen that animal because he was what? He was bound up. He was imprisoned. So there are 1,000 different words for luo, but they all get around to this basic idea that the price has been paid. This person has been loosened, and you can see just how many of them there are. I did highlight some like anti-lutron, which is the idea that Jesus is the one and only acceptable sacrifice to take care of sin before God. So redemption. If you lived in the Middle Ages and you happen to go to a church in the Middle Ages, they might have said redemption was a ransom price paid to Satan. That was absolutely false, but it was medieval theology at the time. When you look in the Bible instead of medieval theology, you understand that this is the bringing together, the reconciliation of God's word and God's justice. God has spoken, in the day you eat of that fruit, you shall surely die. God is going to be absolutely just, but God has a few more parts to him. God is love, and God has made that provision for us in Jesus Christ. So we have this peace that comes to us with God through Christ. We were miles apart. The barrier could never be breached humanly. But God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Incidentally, your soul and spirit is not all that is redeemed, purchased back. Your body is also purchased back. You might think to yourself, naturally speaking, are you joking? I don't want this body forever. Because it's getting sorer and sorer and stiffer, and you keep having to have more procedures done to it. And it's like, will it ever stop? I'm tired of needles already. Yes, there is a redemption day for your body. God will change your body at the very end. And a couple of references that speak of these kinds of things. Because ultimately the time comes when you will be able to look God in the face, and you can't do that in your current form. But when you have a body like unto Christ, as the scriptures say, when Jesus walked out of that tomb, did he walk out as this marred? He still has some marks, sides, hands. But when people saw him on the street, they didn't say, you need to get to the hospital right now. He was in his glorified body, and this part is left, just to remind us, by the way, guys, yeah, it was me. I died on that cross for you, because he loved each one of us. So this is the story, my friends, of redemption, and it is a very important thing to understand as we look at that. Now, my outline is really sloppy today, but it includes this much so far. We have seen there is a right way to ask things of God, and that suffering is part of following God. Servanthood is part of following God. And we have seen what Christ did ultimately in serving by way of redemption. But now we look at a different part where Jesus, in essence, liberates or offers redemption to a blind beggar. And that's why I was going with the title, When Blind Vision is Better. So let's look at the second part here. And I'm just going to leave this on because after that, there's not much left. But that's a great thing to leave up there. Verse 46. Then they came to Jericho. As he went out of Jericho with his disciples and a great number of people, blind Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus, sat by the highway side begging. And when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, Jesus, thou son of David, have mercy on me. And many charged him that he should hold his peace. But he cried a great deal more, saying, Thou son of David, have mercy on me. And Jesus stood still and commanded to him to be called, and they called the blind man, saying, "Be of good comfort, rise, he calls you." So I just want to park it right there for a second and talk about a couple of words. First off, the word Jericho has the idea of perfume. It is also known as the City of Palms. So if you happen to be down there on the Jordan River someplace and you're near this place called Jericho, there were two cities, by the way. There was the old city of Jericho, and there was the Roman city of Jericho. Something you might want to know about Jericho is you don't want to travel alone. You know, there's some places that that it's just not a bright idea to be alone. Camden, New Jersey is such a place. I guess it's rather famous. My friend Bill Toothman told me about his dad, and he's here from the heart of West Virginia. And Bill decided to do something smart, like marry a girl from New Jersey. Why a person would do that's beyond me. But actually, I did that too. But his dad wanted to visit Bill, and so he's driving, and he's lost. And so he stops, and he gets out of his car, because he sees a police officer, and he asks him where he is and where he needs to be headed. You know, help me out. I have no idea what I'm doing. The police officer said, "First, get back in your car, roll up your windows, drive, and don't stop." He was in Camden. And when he had lunch with Bill, he drove immediately back to West Virginia, and my understanding is he never went back to New Jersey again. There are reasons for that. The only car wreck I ever had in my life was in the wonderful state of New Jersey. You know why? Because to turn left, to turn right. Crazy, crazy. But these things are bound to happen if you're in New Jersey. Anyway, sorry to all my good relatives who are out there in New Jersey, but you're probably not watching this anyway. But anyway, yeah, quite the situation. Jericho's like this. It's very, very dangerous, which is why we get the parable of what? The Good Samaritan. That whole parable is based on what's happening here. Well, here's a brave fellow. His name is Bartimaeus. Bar means son. Timaeus means unclean. We don't know anything beyond this, but I think it's interesting that this guy is here. And if that's not enough, here he is. He's begging like a person would beg if they had nothing back in this day. And he heard that it's Jesus, and he uses a very unique name. He says, "Son of David." You know what this guy just said? Can I run this back up to here? When blind vision is better, you know what he just said? By saying "Son of David," he's saying, Jesus, God. He understands he's God. Maybe like others, nobody can do the things that he does. But boy, he couldn't see a thing. But spiritually, he knew, and he could see that Jesus was God. That's huge. Nobody else was around there. Everybody else with their 20/20 vision couldn't tell. They were rather blind in their sins. And they could not tell that Jesus was God. But this person who means son of uncleanness was able to see it. Interesting, isn't it? And most folks would just tell this guy, "Hey, hush up. You're being politically incorrect here. We're the thought police. Just stop. Be quiet. Don't bother him." But he called out, and guess who stops? Jesus. And he gets this word back, "Hey, you take courage. You stand up. Jesus is calling you." And there is that point, and was that point in your life when you stood up and you took courage because Jesus called you. You were blind. You had a serious problem, but Jesus paid the ransom for your soul, and you responded to Jesus personally. You haven't been the same since because he moved into you. That's something that you can only understand if you're a Christian. I have a heavenly guest who hasn't left me in many, many, many years. By the way, there's an Old Testament passage that almost seems to tell this story. It was Isaiah 35, 3-6. And it said, "Strengthen you, the weak hands, and confirm the feeble knees. Say to them that are of a fearful heart, be strong and fear not. Behold, your God will come with vengeance. Even God with a recompense. He will come and save you. The eyes of the blind shall be opened. And that's what's happening here. Then shall that lame man leap as a hart, and the tongue of the dumb shall seek, and in the wilderness shall the waters break forth and stream in the deserts. AKA, there will be life. But when life in a human body walks up to you, that's exactly what you get when you receive Jesus Christ. There is life in everything that he does. Paul is saying we won't have certain professions in heaven. Doctors won't need them. Jesus can take care of everything. And Jesus says to this man something wonderful. He says, your faith has made you whole. Incidentally, Jesus says the same thing for us. Faith is what saved. We placed our complete and our total trust, our pisteu, on Christ. We lean totally in trusting, believing into Jesus Christ. Then, as we continue here, if we were to look at Luke 18:43, it adds a couple of words. Jesus said, verse 52, go thy way, your faith has made you whole. And immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus in the way. And the folks that were around at that point, Luke 18 would add, they were glorifying God. Now, glorifying, well, let me double check this. Kabod. I thought it might be COVID. wouldn't that be a horrible situation? But no, it's kabod. It has this idea of something that's extremely heavy. If you were in my younger generation, or after that, maybe before my generation, you might have used the slang expression, that's heavy. And what you're saying by that is, this isn't just something that I'm going to take lightly. This is something serious. But it is heavy, it's weighty, it's serious, it is bigger than life. And that's God's glory. It's something that God, these people are glorifying God as is appropriate. We can't look on them with our regular eyes. And God can, however, be known through approaching Jesus Christ. I have one final little story for you about people who came to Christ. It was 1773. The story was told by Adam Clark. Some of you might know him as one of those taters. But he said that several people were getting saved, and as occurred in this case, a white fellow and a black fellow had gotten saved. And both of them had come to the point in their lives where they realized that they had a serious sin issue. Can I say that it's very important for us to realize that there's a serious sin issue? Because the message of the gospel is not, God has a great plan for your life. It sounds good, and there's truth in it, but if we just say, try Jesus, which I hate even saying that because it sounds so wrong to me, we're really going after the wrong thing. We have to understand, we've got this problem, unless Jesus saves me, I'm a dead man. All right, now you're getting close, because this is the whole idea. Jesus paid the ransom. I am trusting my soul to Jesus himself completely. And I'm asking him, if, according to Romans 10, 9 and 10, if any man believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, if you confess him with your mouth, if you believe on him in your heart, you shall be saved. All right? Salvation is so terribly important. So these two were struggling with the fact they knew they had a sin problem. As it came out that the black fellow immediately came to Christ. The moment he figured it out. But the other English gentleman of this time, it took him a couple months, I guess, to be just absolutely miserable, knowing that he's going to hell. And the two were talking, and the English guy asked the other fellow, he said, well, how is it that you could come to Christ immediately? And you have to understand, this English guy is all decked out. You know the 1700, what am I looking for? I'm looking for a word. Their costume? Okay. Their what? A tire. Okay, I'll take that. A tire. Very ornate. I mean, you got all this fluffy stuff all over the place, and it's just weighing you down. And the black fella didn't have that. He had very little. And he said to him, he said, your problem is you got too many clothes. So I could run immediately to Christ. No way you can run. And that's why it took you so long to come. There's an element of truth to that, because we did see the rich young ruler, right? And that rich young ruler was struggling with, I'm afraid if I come to Jesus, and he let that, if I'm afraid to come to Jesus, I'm going to lose all of this. Because Jesus said, get rid of your stuff. I want my stuff. And he walks away sadly. It can be a very difficult thing for somebody who's very established to come to the grips that Jesus says, you're the sinner, there's only one hope for you. When you take your last breath, if you don't have Jesus, you've got nothing but an eternity of hell, the lake of fire. It ought to scare anybody. That's called the fear of the Lord. But it also ought to scare us that we aren't naturally, as dead men, wired to walk with the living God. And only Jesus can take that which is dead and bring it to life. You know, years ago I talked to a guy, and the gospel message makes perfect sense to me. Now I made the mistake of saying, you know, the fact that we're a sinner, that makes sense to me, and that God would intervene and Christ would come, that makes sense to me. And he said, Joe, the thing that I heard you say is, this all makes sense to you, and none of it makes sense to me. Well, there was a reason for that. Jesus brought me to life, and it makes sense to me. I probably won't ever say that to a person again, because I need to remember that if you are not alive, you can't understand what is happening. And that's the problem in our world today. So many people can understand what Jesus has to offer, but it's really what we need to be about. It's getting the gospel out. So, wrap up. How do we wrap this up? Come to Jesus. Jesus offers redemption. Don't let spiritual blindness get in your way. Come to Jesus. I remember one person, he didn't know what to do, and he said, essentially, God, I don't know if you're real, but if you are, please reveal yourself to me. And that was somebody in India. And God shared the gospel with that man in India through a rather miraculous means. Don't let anything get in your way. Don't let ambition get in your way. Simply come to Jesus. In fact, maybe it's better being the blind man who said, Jesus, I haven't figured out much, but you're God. That's a great place to start. And that, my friends, is our encouragement today. It's kind of a gospel encouragement, but also I hope that your understanding of redemption is deeper from having been with us today. What happened in the Old Testament, the pictures of what Jesus did, the loosening of yourself from the burdens of sin that would have taken you to hell, all available through our Savior, Jesus Christ. Father, thank you. It has been so good to be in your house today. Would you bless each person as they head home? We ask your protection and your care on them, their loved ones. And we ask, Lord, that we may walk closely with you. We do pray about the situation, Lord, with COVID right now. Everybody's in a mask right here per governor's orders. Our heart's desire, Lord, is that you be glorified and that you be uplifted. And we thank you that we could come together around your word that you taught us today. So in Jesus' precious name, amen. Okay, everybody, God bless you.